to live.
The minister encouraged me as a person who had little or no faith in anything, except, drugs and alcohol, like that, stuff like, that's the only kind of faith, I used to make, but during that time even, he could reach me, and he could encourage and inspire me. And so that's what he had that makes him special.
Minister Farrakhan is a direct reflection of how race is seen in America, and the people that see us differently see him differently.
He's a great man. I think misunderstood in a lot of ways, but I think he's a great, great man. And I'm glad that he's been able to endure.
And despite the, outer perimeters of controversy that attached to Minister Farrakhan, I think black people always understood that this was a man who loved black people, who engaged black people where they lived. And long before rap singers were talking about keeping it real, Minister Farrakhan was speaking truth to power.
Average people follow a path. Leaders of significance, they carve a trail, but there was no path. To that extent, Minister's a trailblazer.
The thing that sticks out mostly for me, Louis Farrakhan, is the organizing, the bringing people together. Say, for instance, the Million Man March.
I promised in a speech at the Javits Center in New York, where nearly 20,000 people came to hear Brother Farrakhan, I said, I will come back and I will speak to black men. Would you come? And they said yes. So it started in New York. And as I was in the heat of my message that night, I said, and it came out of my mouth and I watched it go out, I said, I want to take 1 million men to Washington, D.C. And as I watched the words go out, I couldn't call them back. There it was. That was the beginning of the Million Man March.
In the summer of 1995. And keep in mind, this is the same summer that O.J. Simpson was on trial. The black community was on trial. Time magazine had the minister's picture on the cover, Ministry of Rage.
I remember I did do some interviews where people called me up and asked me to denounce the march.
Some of the Christian ministry said, no, this is anti-Christian and so forth.
I went into cities and towns and villages and hamlets talking to black men. On that day, the Spirit of God descended on us.
My Father is here to speak to you, so listen to him very carefully. Our leader,
when I came down the stairs, the great steps of the Capitol building, my son was introducing me. I felt like a leaf that was caught in the wind, and it had no control over where it would go or where it would land.
The feeling was unbelievable, because when I came into Washington and I was driving to the hotel, I would come to a cross-section, be all these black men, man, walking, almost in silence.
It was a dream come true for the minister to bring 1 million black men. Instead of 1 million, 2 million came. But I believe the women, they were happy to see that their man was 100% for this.
The concept of a Million Man March was, we thought, a very good idea, but we had a problem because it tended to legitimize someone who espoused hatred, who organized it, Louis Farrakhan.
There's no way that if you talk to any of those brothers who were there, not the media, not Newsweek, not ABC, but the brothers who were there to experience that emotional reservoir of love and affection and instruction, There's no way that question could ever be asked without anyone being there having to say absolutely it had an effect.
1 million black men, nearly 2 million showed up. That means that we affected every black family in the United States of America. But the joy in which these black men related to each other, they wept. I saw and heard that black men just broke down and cried. Some people, men hadn't seen each other for years, and they found each other at the Million Man March. Some fathers ran into their sons at the Million Man March.
The overriding thing that strikes us about him is that he can't seem to get away from an approach that includes racism and anti-Semitism.
Blockbuster proudly presents BET's Then and Now Black History Month moment. BET.
Or would be special. I believed that one day I would be a great man. But God and His Spirit has been with me from a little fella. People would look at me and somehow they would tell my mother, I think he's going to be a preacher. I would laugh, you know, because I knew I was going to be an entertainer, some kind of musician. But those old folks knew what they were talking about.
But he was the jewel of the neighborhood's life, really, and the church and the school and wherever he went. He had a talent for lighting up the world.
I grew up as a Christian, an Episcopalian. I sang in the choir. I was an acolyte. I did what young Christian boys do. But because I wanted to see black people free, I never heard that taught in church. My mother, being from the West Indies, on her mantelpiece was a picture of King George and Queen Elizabeth. And of course, there was a picture of Jesus, all three white. But when I went to my uncle's home, I saw nobody white on his mantelpiece. But above his mantelpiece was the picture of a black man. And I thought that that was strange. So I asked him, who is that man? He said, that's a man that came to unite black people. And I was a little short fellow, and so I asked him if he would get a chair, and I stood on the chair to drink in the features of this man. And I said, where is he that I can go and meet him? And he said, he has passed away. And that man in that picture was Marcus Garvey.
His Uncle Samuel, who had got involved with the Marcus Garvey movement and was a strong nationalist, a lover of black.
My uncle was the first in my family to become a follower of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
And in the early days of Elijah, he didn't have this elite group that we have now. He had the scum, man, out the pits. And that nobody else wanted.
That their impact on black America was the right kind of impact.
I visited the mosque in New York, and Brother Malcolm was speaking. And I had never heard any black man talk like this man talked. And after he started teaching, I was convinced that I was going to be a Muslim. I was like a little baby coming into something, and everybody looked so kindly on a new baby with so much love and joy. That's the way they were looking at me. And they asked me to speak. I started to speak, and I began to weep. Some of them began to look at me rather strange. I mean, a man crying, you know. But I was so touched by what I saw in the faces of these men, I said that night that I will take this teaching to every nook and every cranny or corner of the United States of America. That was October 1955.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad knew that Minister Farrakhan was in the audience that Sunday because Malcolm was told that the young, talented entertainer from Boston that was known all over Boston, especially by the young people, was in the audience. And they always felt that his ability could be helpful in building the Nation of Islam.
And back in the 60s, you didn't get a chance to have an impression of him when you first meet him. His work was reverberating all around the nation, and everyone was talking about this brother Minister Lewis this, Lewis that, because he had done some very wonderful things in the Nation of Islam. He had put on the play Organa. He had written a number of songs, Black Gold and White Man's Heaven is a Black Man's Hell. He was very articulate and very outstanding speaker.
My father, as I remember him, was always working on the mission, always working on the resurrection of his people.
No one speaks to them more powerfully and more consistently, with more passion than Minister Louis Farrakhan.
I think his commitment and his relationship to God probably goes back to his childhood.
My mother always taught me as a child, when you're right, son, you can always fight. But when you're wrong, you can't be strong. She tried to abort me 3 times, she told me later. In those days, in the 30s, you know, you didn't have money. She would use a hanger. And God did not let her abort me.
It's when his mother had reached a point in her life, after going through her personal trials and tribulations, that she would dedicate her life to make sure that these boys were raised in a certain way.
So when I was 16, I was graduating from high school, and she received this welfare check. And she took me with her to the welfare office. And she said to the person, I thank you for helping me to get both of my children through high school. This is my last son, and he has completed high school. She gave the woman back the check and said, I will take it from here.
She was the type of mother, or should I say grandmother, that wanted to make sure that we had the best. And that whenever we went out, that we were on our best behavior and had best manners.
My mother was a beautiful black woman, very, very strict, stern, disciplinarian.
She was a single-minded woman. She was singularly devoted to the fact that these children should achieve.
I thank God for such a marvelous woman. She was real dark-skinned, and she made me to love black. And really, because of her, I am who I am. I am what I am. And I shall always be grateful to God for such a mother. And I would hope that every human being would have a mother that loved them like she loved. Not the hug, not the word, but the action.
His ability to tell what's on his mind that most black people love him for, because we have so many leaders who kowtow and genuflect before the shrine of popularity, who don't want to speak their mind because they think it might hurt their bottom line.
I have only one memory of my father, but my uncle, the Honorable Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, these four men were the greatest influence in my life. I was told by Brother Malcolm that I would be the minister in Boston because the two men that were there were constantly squabbling with each other. So I went there with the thought in mind that I would be the minister. But when Brother Malcolm came up to appoint me, he appointed one of the two that was squabbling to be the minister, and he appointed me to be the captain of the FOI. And I served my minister very faithfully, very loyally. But whenever I taught and asked the people to accept, it looked as though the whole row of newcomers would just get up and join. And by May of 1957, the minister could no longer keep up the duty as a minister, and I was appointed the minister of Mosque number 11 in Boston.
He was always warm to all of the children, always warm to the people in the streets.
When he would give us something to do or share his vision, he was always open to our natural and real reaction.
Exactly. Right.
You know, and we were free enough. He gave us the freedom to really say what was really on our mind.
My journey has been, one, rebuild the mosque in Boston after a squabble broke it down. Two, when Brother Malcolm was assassinated, Elijah Muhammad called me and said, I am giving you his place. I never harmed Malcolm, but I did oppose him. I did argue with him. I did speak critically of him in defense of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But plot his death and harm him, that I did not do. I had no part whatsoever in the assassination of Malcolm, but we in the nation could say we are generally guilty because we had a mind to see him harmed, even if we didn't do it ourselves, because we hated what he did to his benefactor.
The right thing by my people. Now I got to do the right thing by you.
You know, and I know how much this people hates me. For what? Because I teach you the truth. That's all. They know that I'm doing a better job with you than any one ever appeared among you.
Losing the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was the lowest point ever, I would think, in his life. Because to him, it was his father, it was his mother, he was his life.
Imam Warithuddin, his son, took over the leadership of the nation, and I submitted to him, although we were at odds. I disagreed with his characterization of the teacher of his father, and even some of his words
concerning his father.
3 years after the departure of my father, my mother, she learned that Minister Farrakhan was considering rebuilding the work of my father and rebuilding the Nation of Islam.
He had the burden of carrying the nation, because when he was set down and Wallace Dean basically became the man when everybody thought it was going to be him, he had to go through total rebuilding. He had to rebuild his own mind, his own soul and heart, and find out what he really wanted to do, and then come back to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, and then deal with all the politics that had been created by the division.
I was very, very despondent over the way the nation had turned, not knowing what to do with my life and the future. I was trying to pursue a show business.
And the question really was, which would be more valuable? To become an actor or a musician, or to bring his considerable care and concern and knowledge to a leadership role in the Muslim faith.
In the middle of this rebuilding, Reverend Jackson decides to run.
And I remember we had a meeting at the Final Call, the building that's owned by the Nation of Islam on 79th Street, of all of the laborers in the Nation of Islam. And we decided unanimously that we would back Reverend Jackson's campaign and that Minister Farrakhan should get involved.
Well, up to that time, the minister had not been very involved in politics in a voting sense. As a matter of fact, he went downtown and registered to vote on that occasion.
When Minister Farrakhan went forward and began to defend Reverend Jackson and his campaign, so they were beating up on the minister every day, every paper.
Any religion that does not feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the imprisoned is a gutter religion, whether it's a Catholic gutter religion, whether it's Islam, whether it's Jewish, and so on. I'm not sure that's the same words he said, but it was to that effect. And as a result, it went on the airwaves, and right away, all hell broke loose.
Minister Farrakhan talks repeatedly about those kinds of issues that stir resentment and more against Jews, and that historically have been the source of very dangerous things.
The members of the Jewish community, many of them used Minister Farrakhan as a litmus test for Reverend Jackson, to say to Reverend Jackson that you can't have the likes of Louis Farrakhan supporting your campaign, and we want you to denounce him and to separate yourself from him.
As I grew in the Nation of Islam, I found out that he had those that were envious and jealous of him within the nation and without.
You are a witness that for the last 16 going on 17 years, I have withstood a blistering attack, not only by whites and the government, but by my own brothers and sisters who were afraid of the consequences of association with me.
The Jewish community, which I think has certainly branded him unfairly. Many things that I know in the press that are untrue. For instance, I was at his home one afternoon to pick up something, and at the same time he's being attacked relative to not talking to the Jewish community. I'm leaving his house, and there were 5 rabbis sitting there in his home to talk to him.
Sometimes when you have character and you stand up for what you believe is right, some people will not understand that and become offended by that.
He's also been, for me, I think, a voice of consciousness who raises issues that are neither convenient nor popular, but dares to ask the questions, I guess, and raise the issues and demand that those questions be raised, asked, and answered in society, where I think so much has been put under the rug or so much has been ignored.
People say that Farrakhan has a lot of courage. It's not that I'm courageous. I don't call it courage. I just love God.
A man like that I would follow him into hell with a gasoline jacket on.
Sounds of Beethoven or Mendelssohn. That is very dear and close to his heart, is his violin.
And I remember at around 5 going on 6, my mother gave me the violin and gave my brother the piano and found us teachers. It seemed like from when I could remember, I was always on stage. And with the violin, you know, my peers, when they would have me play in grammar school, play at programs, my peers would be amazed at what I could do. And then I was singing in the choir. And then I learned that I had a voice, and I started singing in nightclubs ballads. And since my parents were from the Caribbean, I learned to sing calypso from some of the great calypsonians of that time.
I've seen his symphonic work, and I think, personally, that's one of the things that really separates him from many of the other so-called leaders. I personally believe that true leadership has to be connected with some artistic sensibility. And he, more than anyone else, demonstrates that.
It is my hope that my performance will inspire young people to want to go pick up a violin and a viola or a cello, get involved in the strings and the classics. The greatest violinist to me was a man named Yasha Heifetz, who was a Russian Jew. My first great teacher in Boston was a Russian Jew. My teacher today is a Russian Jew. There's no way that I could play the violin and be antagonistic toward Jews when some of them are the greatest artists and some of them have been the greatest writers, composers. My teachers are black, my teachers are white, my teachers are Christians, my teachers are Jews, my teachers are Muslims. I think I've had a universal upbringing.
The minister, out of all of the national leaders, has been addressing the issue of rappers and the hip-hop community. He did it personally, but he also did it through many of us who were his representatives.
The question is, why are we here? A lot of the people in the industry have that concern because that's the question from the press.
Well, first and foremost, I think he's the only person or personality that the hip-hop community respects.
Let's bring on Minister Louis Farrakhan. So this is about change. Change. And you are on the cutting edge of that change. It's a song that I used to hear sung when I was in show business a few days ago. It said, there'll be a change in the weather, a change in the sea. From now on, there'll be a change in me.
I wanted them to know that they were in a position of leadership And I wanted to encourage them to accept the responsibility of leadership.
I never left his side. I was there from the time he crashed.
That there would be threats on our life, and there was danger in the work that my father was doing.
There was a lady who lived next door who was yelling out of her window, saying, your house is on fire, your house is on fire. My husband took 3 of the children, he ran down the back stairs, and he was passing them to the firemen.
My father had 3 or 4 of us locked in his hands. And as he was running down the stairs, he dropped me.
So the fire chief was saying, no, let me go back and get her. He said, no, I will go and get my daughter.
This left such a great impression on my mind as a child. I felt that I had to protect my father. So what I would do is in the middle of the night when he would go to bed, I would get up and I would stand on the front porch and just look out the window to make sure that there was no one trying to plant a bomb or, you know, burn us up again.
Whoever set the fire, they didn't mean for any of us to get out.
I'm blessed because my children love me.
Well, my father called and said, yeah, I want you to speak to my doctors. And while I was on the phone in a conference with his doctors by phone, I get another call that came through that says, we're rushing Daddy to the hospital.
I hemorrhaged here at this farm. And my son wrapped me in a towel and we put on some kind of clothes and they rushed me to the hospital.
They had a cartoon that came out in the New York Post of 2 Jewish doctors operating on my father with a saw in their hand with lines going across the neck, talking about we're going to remove the cancer, or basically cutting off his head. And that is the backdrop of us trying to make a decision of where we're going to take the minister.
Other things was happening, blood pouring out of him, and he doesn't want to go to the hospital. Your mind, you're thinking so many things, could die.
We drove. When he got to that hospital, they had to give him some type of medication to stop the pain, and the medication that they gave him caused him to be in more pain. And as honest to God, I felt this was my sentiment, that if my father died on this table, he's not going to be the only one that died.
I know that my brothers and sisters and my mother would get their cue off of me. And if I started to panic and let them know just how severe it was, that wouldn't have been a very good thing.
Several times I cried, and I was just thanking the Almighty God for restoring his life back to us, because we truly almost lost the minister.
I thank God for this period of my suffering, because literally God arrested me to rest me.
His being alive is a miracle unto itself. He has just refused to surrender his spirit, his body, his religion, and he keeps on fighting back.
It was Farrakhan. So CNN and all Reuters and AP and everyone took that message around the world. So the heads of state and the people in those governments were anxious to receive the man who led a 1 million man march that they had saw on television all over the world.
I've never been so honored to be the son of my father when I saw the response to him in all of these different countries with these different heads of state that respect him.
Elijah Muhammad told me, find a way to unite with the Muslim world. He didn't tell me how to do it. He just told me to do it. The most beautiful thing happened December 1999. Imam Warithuddin, his brother, Elijah Muhammad II, his daughter, and his secretary visited me, and we had a luncheon together, and I asked him if he would be my guest at Savior's Day 2000.
I wanted to say that the Imam and I will be together until death overtakes us.
There always has to be evolution, and I think that the progressive changes that have taken place in the nation today are very clear and very obvious to everyone, that we have reached the global expression of Islam, which was the intention of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
I was invited as the first non-Iranian to speak, and there were approximately 6 million people in the square and in the side streets looking by screen and listening by television and radio. It was a tremendous outpouring. The people held me in such high regard after hearing me till they just wanted to touch me. And in many countries, when my plane landed, the people were all in the airport and on the tarmac singing songs of welcome. Every black leader who tried to connect us to the international struggle of poor and black people became an enemy that was dealt with by the government of the United States of America. Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, Martin King, anybody that connected us to the suffering reality of third world people became a threat.
His name would go down in history as being able to make a change in society, specifically in the black society of men.
Some don't have the courage to say the things that they believe. Even though in our hearts we think it. I know I think some of the things that he said, and would I have the courage to say them? I'm not sure.
His desire to fulfill the vision of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad within the framework of his work is what has made the greatest impact and a tremendous impact on millions of our people across America and now throughout the world.
His ability to create a connection with you based on his understanding of the Word of God, both in the Bible and in the Quran, and to make you feel a part of God's unfolding work.
What he primarily proselytizes, I think all black Americans agree with, which is to be stand-up men, responsible men, men that are dependable, that take care of their families, that respect their wives and children, that try to get gainful employment, to be a help to the community. All those things, how could you possibly object to that?
For the first time in African-American history, a non-Christian leader is a significant, if not the significant leader within black America.
He's given me a purpose in life. He's given me something to live for. And I really don't know where I would be without him, because he's given me a chance to serve a cause bigger than myself.
Well, my dad is my hero. Even though he may not have been the type of dad that I saw on TV, like with the Cosby or the Brady Bunch or any of those popular shows, you always kind of idealize in your head how you think a father should be. But one thing I can say about my dad is he gave me a foundation, a very strong foundation on which to build, and that's priceless.
He believes that he was called to a mission, and anyone who is called to the mission and believes this is his mission, he can never retire. He must die on his post.
I would like my children to say to me, we watched you all your life struggle. To see the rise of black people. Take your rest. We will carry on this mission until black people all over this earth are free and human beings can live a dignified life without oppression and ignorance as the constant burden.